Chapter 1. Comfortable certainty. Jannet Ross liked certainty. Not in a grand, philosophical sense, but in the practical way her mornings unfolded exactly as she intended them to. The coffee maker clicked on at 6:45 a.m., the soft hum filling her apartment like a familiar greeting. By 7:05, she was standing at her kitchen counter, scrolling through emails she didn't quite need to read yet, sipping coffee that was just slightly too hot and therefore perfect. Her life fit together neatly. Her job, for one, was a quiet success story she didn't talk about much. A steady 9-to-5 role in operations at a mid-sized company, neither glamorous nor dull. It was the kind of work that rewarded consistency and attention, two things Jannet had always supplied without fanfare. She liked that her days had structure, that problems came in manageable sizes, and that solutions felt tangible. And then there was Ryan. Ryan Baker had been part of her life for almost 3 years, a timeline that felt both substantial and inevitable. When she thought about him, which she did often, she imagined continuity. Holidays that turned into traditions. Conversations that turned into decisions. Decisions that turned into a life. He was dependable in the quiet ways that mattered. "Are we still on for Saturday?" he'd asked over the phone earlier that week, his voice warm with the kind of casual confidence she adored. "Of course we are," she had replied, smiling even though he couldn't see it. "You think I'd miss food trucks and questionable dessert choices? I think you'd miss them if there were spreadsheets involved." "That is deeply offensive," she'd said. "I would never prioritize spreadsheets over fried dough." "Good to know I'm still competing with funnel cake," Ryan had laughed. That was how they were light, easy, anchored. By the time Jannet arrived at the office that Monday morning, she was already thinking about Saturday. The food festival downtown was something Ryan had been talking about for weeks, and his enthusiasm had quietly become hers. It was their sort of thing, wandering, sharing food, laughing over things that didn't matter. She slipped into her chair, setting her bag down and waking her computer. Across the aisle, a few coworkers were already gathered in loose conversation, their voices blending into the ambient hum of the workspace. "Jannet!" She turned at the sound of her name, expecting a routine interruption. What she didn't expect was the flicker of recognition that followed. "Sam?" she said, blinking once as the past aligned itself with the present. Sam Mitchum stood a few steps away, looking both exactly the same and entirely different. There was a familiarity in the way he smiled, easy, slightly amused, but time had sharpened the edges somehow. He looked settled. "I was hoping that was you," he said. "First day here and I'm thinking, there's no way that's the same Jannet Ross who used to survive on vending machine lunches." She laughed, surprised at how quickly it came. "Excuse you, those lunches were carefully curated. Peanut butter crackers and a soda is not curated. It was a system." He nodded solemnly. "A flawed system." The exchange settled into something comfortable almost immediately, like stepping into a conversation that had only briefly paused rather than ended years ago. They had worked together straight out of college, two new hires trying to look like they understood far more than they did. Those months had been filled with shared confusion, small victories, and the kind of bonding that came from mutual inexperience. Eventually, they had gone their separate ways, career paths branching off quietly, and now, somehow, they'd folded back together. "This is weird," she admitted, leaning slightly against her desk. "I mean, not weird bad, just unexpected." "I'll take unexpected over awkward," Sam said. "Same." There was a brief pause, not uncomfortable, just real. "So," he continued, "you've been here long?" "Almost 4 years. Then I'm officially late to the party." "It's not much of a party," she said. "More like a well-organized gathering." "I can work with that." They spoke for a few more minutes, catching up in broad strokes, jobs, cities, the general shape of adulthood. Felt easy, uncomplicated. When Sam eventually moved on to finish his onboarding tour, Jannet returned to her computer with a faint smile still lingering. It was nice, she thought, reconnecting with someone who remembered a version of you that no one else in your current life had seen. By lunchtime, that feeling hadn't quite faded. Her phone buzzed as she sat at her desk, a text lighting up the screen. "Sam, so where do people here escape for decent food? Or am I back to peanut butter crackers?" Jannet laughed under her breath and typed back. "Jannet, we've evolved. I'll show you at some point." Sam, relieved. "My standards were dangerously low." She set the phone down, not thinking much of it. It was harmless, friendly. Across town, Ryan sent her a message a little later. "Ryan, thinking about Saturday. Prepare yourself for aggressive snack sampling." Her smile softened. "Jannet, I've been training for this all week." 2 conversations, 2 parts of her day, existing side by side without conflict. At least that was how she saw it. As the afternoon stretched on, Jannet found herself glancing at her phone more often than usual, conversations picking up in small, scattered intervals. Nothing significant, nothing that demanded attention, just moments. And in those moments, something subtle shifted. Not enough to notice, not enough to name, just enough to exist. When she left the office that evening, the rhythm of her life still felt intact. Predictable, reliable, hers. Jannet Ross liked certainty. She just hadn't realized how easily it could blur. Chapter 2. Familiar threads. By Wednesday, what had begun as a pleasant surprise had settled into something more routine. Jannet hadn't planned for that. She noticed it early that morning, standing in the small kitchenette at work while waiting for the microwave to finish reheating her oatmeal. Her phone buzzed once in her hand, then again almost immediately after. Sam. Important question. Has the office coffee improved since 2016, or should I bring my own survival kit? She smiled before she could stop herself. Jannet. Define improved. Is less likely to taste like regret. Sam. Less likely isn't comforting. She leaned against the counter, tapping out a reply without much thought. Jannet, you'll adapt. You always did. There was a pause, brief but noticeable, before his response came through. Sam. That's because you gave excellent guidance. It lingered on her screen for a second longer than it should have, not because of what it said, but because of how easily it drew her back into something familiar. It was the tone, the rhythm of it. Their conversations always had that subtle undercurrent of shared history, even when the topics were trivial. The microwave beeped, pulling her attention back. She grabbed her bowl and headed back to her desk, shaking off the moment without really examining it. It was just Sam, a friend. An old one, which somehow made him easier to categorize. By mid-morning, the workday had picked up its usual pace. Jannet moved through her tasks efficiently, answering emails, reviewing reports, and coordinating with her team in the quiet, steady way she preferred. If anything, she felt sharper today, more engaged. Her phone buzzed again. She waited this time, finishing the paragraph she was typing before glancing down. Sam. Okay, follow-up. Is there anywhere within walking distance that doesn't involve fluorescent lighting and despair? She laughed softly under her breath. Jannet. You're dramatic. There's a sandwich place around the corner. Sam. Is it good, or is it we have no other options good? She hesitated for half a second. Then Jannet. Meet me at noon and find out. The invitation felt natural. Automatic, even. It didn't carry weight in her mind. It wasn't a decision so much as a continuation. When noon came, they met in the lobby and stepped out into the warm midday air together. The walk to the sandwich shop was short, the conversation stretching just enough to fill the distance without effort. You still overanalyze menus? Sam asked as they reached the corner. I do not overanalyze. I consider my options. You stood in front of a vending machine for 5 minutes once. That was strategic thinking. That was indecision. She smiled sideways at him. It was thorough. Inside, they ordered quickly, finding a small table near the window. The place buzzed with lunchtime energy, but their conversation slipped easily into its own quieter bubble. They talked about the past at first, stories that felt lighter with time, small details that had once seemed significant and now simply amused them. Do you remember how convinced we were that we were going to get fired? Sam said, shaking his head as he unwrapped his sandwich. We probably should have been, Jannet replied. Speak for yourself. You sent an email to the wrong department. It was one email. It was a very wrong email. He grinned. And yet I survived. You're welcome. I fixed it. You edited it. I salvaged it. He shook his head, smiling. You've always been like that, quietly keeping things from falling apart. The comment landed a little deeper than the others, though she couldn't have said why. It's just attention to detail, she said, brushing it off lightly. Sure, he said, not pressing. They moved on to the present after that, work, routines, the general shape of their days. It wasn't heavy or complicated, just the kind of conversation that filled time comfortably. By the time they finished eating, Jannet felt something she hadn't expected. Refreshed. Not in a dramatic sense, but in the subtle way that a break in routine could shift your perspective just enough to notice it. That was a solid recommendation, Sam said as they stepped back outside. I told you. I'm cautiously optimistic about the rest of your suggestions now. Don't get ahead of yourself. They walked back together, parting easily at the elevators. Same time tomorrow? He asked casually. She hesitated, just briefly, but it wasn't hesitation born of concern. It was more about routine, about what her usual lunch schedule looked like. Then she shrugged. Sure. Good, he said, stepping into a different elevator bank. I'll try not to ask too many critical questions about the coffee between now and then. No promises, she called after him. Back at her desk, she settled into the afternoon again, but something about the day had shifted slightly. It wasn't disruptive. If anything, it made things feel fuller. Her phone buzzed again around 3. This time it was Ryan. Ryan. Random thought. Do we try everything on Saturday, or do we pace ourselves like responsible adults? Her expression softened immediately. Jannet. When have we ever been responsible about food? Ryan, fair point. I'm preparing a strategy anyway. Jannet. Your strategies always involve eating too much too fast. Ryan, that's called efficiency. She smiled, leaning back slightly in her chair. Jannet. I'm looking forward to it. There was no hesitation in that. Ryan wasn't something she needed to think about or analyze. He was steady, present, known. Their conversations didn't compete with anything else in her life. They anchored it. And yet, later that afternoon, when she found herself rereading something Sam had texted about office culture, something mildly funny, easily forgettable. She didn't question why she smiled again. It was just nice. That was the word she kept returning to. Nice. By Thursday, the rhythm had deepened. Morning messages, lunch plans, small updates throughout the day that didn't demand response but invited it anyway. Jannet didn't see it as an increase. To her, it felt like continuity, like picking up a thread that had been set down years ago and realizing it still fit in her hands. "You're popular this week," her coworker Melissa said lightly as she passed by Janet's desk, nodding toward the phone in her hand. Jannet glanced up, momentarily startled. "What? You've been texting more," Melissa said. Not accusatory, just observant. "Oh," Jannet said, a small laugh escaping. "An old friend just started here. That explains it." "Yeah, it's actually really nice." Melissa smiled. "It's good to have familiar people around." Exactly. That was all it was. Familiarity. Comfort. Nothing that needed to be examined too closely. That evening, Jannet sat on her couch, her laptop open but largely ignored as her phone lit up again. "Sam, serious question this time. Have you ever been to that food festival downtown?" She blinked, then smiled. "Jannet, I'm going this Saturday, actually." The reply came quickly. "Sam, perfect timing. Worth it?" She thought of Ryan immediately, of the way he'd described it, the way he'd been looking forward to it. "Jannet, from what I hear, yes. I've been warned to show up hungry." "Sam, that's my default state." She laughed, typing back without hesitation. "Jannet, then you'll fit right in." There was a pause, longer than usual. When his next message came, it was lighter, a comment about trying everything in sight. The conversation moved on easily from there, drifting into other topics. Jannet set her phone down eventually, stretching slightly as she finally turned her attention back to her laptop. But her thoughts lingered, not on anything specific, just on the feeling of the exchange. It was, again, that same word. Nice. Across town, Ryan was likely doing something equally ordinary. Cooking, maybe, or watching something in the background while he scrolled through his phone. She pictured him easily, without effort. That hadn't changed. Nothing had changed. Jannet Ross still liked certainty. She just didn't notice how, piece by piece, it was beginning to share space with something else. Chapter 3: Misplaced Boundaries. By Friday morning, the rhythm no longer felt new. Felt normal. Jannet slipped her phone into her bag as she stepped out of her apartment, mentally reviewing her day, emails to answer, a report to finalize, a meeting at 11 she didn't especially care about. Woven quietly through it all, without announcement or priority, was the expectation that she would hear from Sam at some point. Probably more than once. She didn't question that expectation. It had simply settled. Her commute passed in its usual blur of movement and background noise, and by the time she reached her desk, the workday had already begun humming. She opened her computer, took a sip of coffee, and barely 10 minutes later, her phone lit up. "Sam, I've decided the office coffee is part of a long-term character-building initiative." She smiled, not surprised. "Jannet, it's working. You're noticeably more dramatic." "Sam, you appreciate it." "Jannet, I tolerate it." Another reply came almost immediately. "Sam, that's basically admiration." She shook her head slightly, the faintest hint of amusement lingering as she set the phone down. It wasn't a significant exchange, barely more than a few lines, but it carried that same current, easy, familiar, continuous. Across the aisle, Melissa glanced over again. "You two text a lot," she said, not looking up from her own screen. Jannet blinked. "Do we?" Melissa shrugged. "Just an observation." Jannet hesitated, then let out a small, dismissive laugh. "It's just because he's new. I'm helping him adjust." "That makes sense," Melissa said, her tone neutral. It did make sense. That was the thing about it, it all made sense, piece by piece. Nothing about it felt excessive when you looked at each moment on its own. By late morning, Jannet had moved fully into her work, focusing on the report in front of her. Numbers lined up, details fell into place, and for a while her phone lay quiet. Then it buzzed. She glanced down, intending to ignore it until she finished her thought. Instead, her eyes caught the message. "Sam, lunch? Or am I on my own today?" She paused. It wasn't the question itself, it was simple, casual, but something about the expectation behind it stood out just for a second. She could say no. She had things to do. It wouldn't be unusual. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for that brief moment, there was space to choose differently. Then she typed, "Jannet, lunch works." The hesitation vanished as quickly as it had come. At noon, they found themselves walking the same route as the day before, their conversation picking up without effort, as though it had been waiting for them. "So," Sam said, glancing over at her. "Big weekend plans?" "Food festival tomorrow," she replied. "Ryan's been talking about it all week." "Ah," he said, nodding. "The famous Ryan." She smiled. "You say that like he's a legend. I've heard enough to know he's significant." "He is," she said easily. "We've been together almost 3 years." "3 years," he repeated. "That's serious." "It is." There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty. It was a statement she had made many times before, one that carried weight and certainty in equal measure. Sam nodded again, thoughtful but not probing. He sounds like a good guy. He is, she said. The conversation could have shifted there, back to something lighter, but for some reason it didn't. What's the festival like? He asked instead. Crowded, she said with a small laugh. A little chaotic. A lot of food. Sounds like my kind of environment. It's fun, she added. Ryan likes to pretend he has a system, but it always falls apart halfway through. Systems are overrated. Not in his world, she said. He takes them very seriously. Sam smiled faintly. And you don't. I like structure, she admitted, but I'm more flexible about it. That checks out. She glanced at him. What does that mean? It means you're the kind of person who plans ahead, he said, unwrapping his sandwich, but doesn't panic when things don't go exactly as planned. That's surprisingly accurate. I've known you before, he said simply. The comment settled between them, quiet but present. After a moment, she exhaled lightly, shifting the conversation forward. You should go sometime, she said. It's worth it, even with the crowd. There was no deeper meaning attached to the suggestion, not in her mind. It was the kind of thing people said all the time, recommendations, casual invitations to experiences. Sam looked at her for a second, just long enough for the moment to feel slightly more deliberate. Tomorrow? He asked. She blinked. The question wasn't unexpected, he had been asking about it. But the directness of it shifted something just slightly. Yeah, she said, nodding. It's all weekend. He considered that, then smiled. I might check it out. You should, she said. And then, without thinking, without pausing to examine the space she was stepping into, she added, you could meet up with us. The words landed lightly, effortlessly, as though they belonged there. Sam didn't respond immediately. You and Ryan? He clarified. Yeah, she said. We'll be there most of the afternoon, probably near the main row of trucks. It's not hard to find us. There it was. Simple, logical, harmless. At least that's how it felt to her. Sam held her gaze for a second, something unreadable flickering behind his expression before it settled into something easy again. I don't want to interfere, he said. You won't, she replied quickly. It's just a festival. The more the better, right? The confidence in her voice erased any lingering hesitation. All right, he said. If I'm there, I'll find you. Perfect, she said, smiling. The conversation moved on after that, drifting into other topics without resistance. By the time lunch ended, the moment had already folded itself into the background of the day, just another small decision among many. Back at her desk, Jannet resumed her work, her focus returning naturally. Her phone buzzed again mid-afternoon. This time it was Ryan. Ryan, still on track for tomorrow? I'm thinking we start at the taco truck. Her expression softened instantly. Jannet, definitely. I've been looking forward to this all week. Ryan, same. I'll pick you up around noon. Jannet, perfect. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then she typed, Jannet. Oh, by the way, an old friend from work might stop by too. I told him about the festival. The message sat there for a moment before she hit send, the thought barely registering as something that could matter. Ryan's reply didn't come right away. When it did, it was simple. Ryan, got it. Jannet read it once, then again, her brow furrowing slightly. There was nothing wrong with the response. It wasn't negative, wasn't upset. Just brief. She shrugged it off, setting her phone down. He was probably busy. There was no reason to read into it. None at all. As the day wound down and people began packing up, Jannet gathered her things, her mind already shifting toward the weekend. The plan was set. Everything was in place. She felt good, steady, excited, certain in the quiet way she always preferred. She didn't revisit the invitation in her mind, didn't turn it over or examine it from another angle. Because from where she stood, there was only one way to see it. It was just a friend. It was just a festival. And nothing about that, to her, felt like crossing a line. Not yet. Chapter 4, The Afternoon That Broke. Saturday arrived with sunlight that felt intentional, as if the day itself had decided to cooperate with everyone's plans. Jannet stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the hem of her top for no real reason other than the nervous energy humming beneath her skin. It wasn't anxiety, not exactly. It was anticipation. Ryan was picking her up at noon. They'd spend the afternoon at the festival, wandering through the crowded streets, sharing food, laughing over things neither of them would remember in detail later. Just the feeling of them. That was what she loved about days like this. The simplicity. Her phone buzzed on the dresser just as she reached for her bag. She glanced at it, expecting Ryan. It was Sam. Sam headed downtown later. Might try to survive the crowds. She paused, reading it once more before replying. Jannet, good luck. It gets intense. A moment passed. Sam, I'll find you if I make it through. She smiled faintly. Jannet, we'll be near the main row. She didn't think twice about it. Not about how easily she said we. Not about how casual the expectation had become. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Right on time. When she opened it, Ryan stood there in a navy t-shirt and jeans, hands tucked casually into his pockets, his expression softening the second he saw her. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she echoed, stepping aside to let him in. He leaned down to kiss her, brief but warm, and something inside her settled in that familiar way. Whatever else existed in her week, work, conversations, background noise, this was the constant. The thing that didn't require effort to understand. "You ready?" he asked, glancing around her apartment. "Or are we doing the 5 more minutes thing?" "I'm ready," she said, grabbing her bag. "I respect the food too much to be late." "Good," he said with a small smile. "There's a plan." Of course there is. The drive downtown was easy, filled with the kind of conversation that didn't need to go anywhere specific. "I mapped it out," Ryan said, one hand on the wheel. "We start with the tacos, then circle back toward the dessert trucks before it gets too crowded. You realize none of that is going to happen as planned. It will if we commit. You always say that. And I'm always optimistic." She laughed, glancing out the window as the city shifted around them. The early signs of the festival already taking shape. Clusters of people, colorful banners, the faint suggestion of music drifting through the streets. By the time they found parking and made their way toward the main area, the energy had fully taken hold. The air was thick with the scent of food and movement, voices overlapping in a constant hum that felt almost alive. "This is exactly how I pictured it," Jannet said, taking it in. Ryan glanced at her. "Good." They moved into the crowd together, his hand finding hers instinctively. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just habit, one that grounded them in the shifting chaos around them. "Okay," he said, scanning the rows of trucks. "Tacos first. You're very committed to this." "I've been preparing." She smiled, letting him lead them through the crowd. Felt easy the way it always did with him. Predictable in the best sense. They ordered, waited, found a small standing table near the edge of the walkway. The food was good, better than expected, and for a while, everything unfolded exactly as she'd imagined. Conversation drifted naturally, punctuated by shared bites and passing observations. "This is way better than last year's place," Ryan said. "You say that every time we try something new, because I have faith in progress. You have faith in food." "That too." She laughed, shaking her head, and for a moment, just a moment, there was nothing else. No distractions, no shifts, just them. Her phone buzzed. She barely registered it at first, mid-conversation as Ryan was explaining why they should skip the line at another truck and come back later. Then it buzzed again. She glanced down reflexively. "Sam, I made it. This place is chaos." She exhaled lightly, a small smile flickering across her face. "Everything okay?" Ryan asked, his tone casual, but his eyes briefly dipping toward her phone. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just Sam, he's here." There was a slight pause, not long enough to be obvious to anyone else, but she felt it. "Oh," Ryan said. "He said he might come," she added, as if that completed the thought, as if it explained everything. Ryan nodded once, his expression neutral. "Right? He'll probably find us," she said, slipping her phone back into her bag. Another pause, this one quieter. "Okay," Ryan said. The word was simple, measured. The moment passed, or at least it seemed to. They moved on, drifting toward the next row of trucks, the crowd thickening as the afternoon deepened. Jannet found herself scanning faces without really meaning to, a subtle awareness threading through her attention now. It didn't feel wrong, just adjusted. "You're distracted," Ryan said lightly as they paused near another line. "I'm not," she said automatically. He raised an eyebrow. "You just looked over my shoulder 3 times. I'm just people watching," she replied. "Right," he said, not arguing. Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Jannet." She turned instantly. Sam approached from a few feet away, weaving through the crowd with an easy confidence. He looked relaxed, hands in his pockets, eyes flicking between her and Ryan. "There you are," he said, stopping in front of them. "Hey," she said, smiling. "You found us." "You weren't hard to spot," he said. There was a brief moment, just long enough to notice before she remembered. "Sam, this is Ryan." The introduction seemed straightforward in her mind, something she'd done countless times in different contexts. "Ryan, this is Sam. We used to work together." Ryan extended his hand, his posture polite but reserved. "Nice to meet you." "Same here," Sam replied, shaking his hand. There was nothing overt in the exchange, no tension anyone could point to, and yet, something in the air shifted. Not dramatically, not enough to break anything outright, but enough to change the shape of the moment. "So," Sam said, glancing around, "what's the strategy?" Jannet laughed lightly. "Ryan has a whole system." "Of course he does," Sam said, smiling. Ryan didn't return the smile fully. "It's more of a plan," he said. "We're working through the trucks in sections." "Efficient," Sam said. "Trying to be." Jannet felt the space between them before she understood it. It was subtle, just a slight misalignment, like a conversation that wasn't quite finding its rhythm. They moved together for a short while after that, drifting from truck to truck. Jannet spoke easily, filling gaps without noticing she was doing it. Her attention stretched just slightly thinner than before. And Ryan grew quieter. Not withdrawn. Not angry. Just distant. At one point, as they stood off to the side with another round of food, Jannet turned to say something to him. Ryan, you should try. He wasn't there. For a second, her mind stalled. Confusion rising before her eyes found him a few steps away. Already turning, already walking. Ryan? She called, her voice cutting through the noise. He didn't stop. Didn't turn back. He kept walking, weaving through the crowd with a kind of quiet certainty that felt heavier than anything he'd said all day. Ryan! She called again, louder this time. Nothing. The space he left behind felt immediate. Noticeable. Real. What? She started, taking a step forward before stopping herself. He probably just needs a minute, Sam said gently. She turned sharply. Why would he need a minute? But even as she said it, something in her chest tightened. Not understanding, not yet, but something adjacent to it. I don't know, Sam replied carefully. You might want to go after him. She hesitated. It was only a moment. A small, stubborn moment where the pieces didn't quite line up the way she thought they should. I didn't do anything wrong, she said, more to herself than anyone else. Sam didn't answer that. Around them, the festival carried on. Music, laughter, movement. All of it continuing as though nothing had changed. But something had. Jannet stood there for another second, the absence of Ryan settling in slowly, uncomfortably. Then, without another word, she turned away from the crowd. The energy of the afternoon drained out of her step as she made her way back toward the street, her thoughts tangled and defensive, pushing against something she still couldn't fully see. She didn't follow him. Not yet. And by the time she reached her car, the certainty she had started the day with no longer fit the way it used to. Chapter 5. The mirror at home. The drive to her parents' house felt longer than it was. Jannet kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, jaw set in a way that usually meant she was reasoning something through. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but methodically. That was how she liked to solve problems. Step by step. Calm. Logical. She replayed the afternoon in fragments. Ryan walking away. Not saying anything. Not even looking back. Her chest tightened at that part. Not because she thought she'd done something wrong, but because it didn't make sense. That was the part that unsettled her. It didn't match the version of events she had in her mind. I didn't do anything wrong, she muttered quietly to herself. The words steady but not quite as convincing as they had been earlier. The silence in the car didn't argue back. When she pulled into her parents' driveway, the familiarity of it grounded her immediately. The house hadn't changed much. The same white siding, the same slightly overgrown hedges her father refused to trim, until it was absolutely necessary, which meant never. She grabbed her keys, stepped out of the car, and headed inside without overthinking it. Her mother was in the kitchen when she walked in, standing at the counter with a dish towel draped over her shoulder. She looked up, surprise softening into warmth almost instantly. Jannet, she said. I wasn't expecting you. Jannet let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Yeah, I needed to stop by. Her mother studied her for half a second, just long enough to notice that something wasn't quite right. Okay, she said gently. Come sit. Jannet dropped her bag by the door and moved to the kitchen table, sliding into a chair as her mother poured her a glass of water without asking. Her father appeared a moment later from the living room, pausing when he saw her. Well, this is unexpected. Her younger brother, Daniel, followed shortly after, his expression immediately curious. Why does this feel like there's a story? He said, leaning casually against the doorframe. Jannet gave him a look. There's always a story with you. Exactly. So go ahead. She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to tell them, it was the opposite. She needed to hear it out loud, to have someone reflect it back to her in a way she couldn't do on her own. She folded her hands together on the table, staring at them for a moment before finally speaking. I was at the food festival with Ryan, she began. And it didn't go well. Her mother sat across from her, attentive and quiet. What happened? She asked softly. Jannet exhaled. I invited someone to meet us there. Someone, Daniel repeated, already sounding suspicious. An old friend from work, Jannet said quickly. Sam. We used to work together years ago, and he just started at my company this week. We've been catching up. Her father crossed his arms, but didn't interrupt. Jannet continued, her words gaining momentum as she explained, laying it out exactly as she had experienced it. We've been talking a lot this week, just because he's new and it's familiar, I guess. And he asked about the festival, so I told him about it, and then yesterday I said he could come by if he wanted to. Her brother blinked slowly. You invited him? He asked. Yes, she said, her tone firm. I didn't think it was a big deal. It's a public event. It's not like it was just the two of us. And Ryan knew? Her mother asked. I texted him yesterday, Jannet said. I told him Sam might stop by. Might? Daniel echoed. Jannet frowned. Yes, might. I didn't know for sure. And then he showed up, her father said. Yes, she replied. And everything was fine at first. We were just talking, walking around, normal things. And then suddenly Ryan just left. The words came out sharper now, frustration weaving into them. He didn't say anything. He didn't explain. He just walked away like I had done something terrible. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Daniel laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but clearly. Jannet looked at him, incredulous. Are you serious right now? He held up a hand, shaking his head slightly as he tried to compose himself. Wait, he said. Wait. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. She narrowed her eyes. You understood it the first time. Just humor me, he said, pushing off the doorframe and stepping closer. So, you were on a date with your boyfriend? Yes. And during that date, you invited another guy to come hang out with you. He's not another guy. He's a man, Daniel cut in. A man you've been texting all week. Jannet opened her mouth to respond, but he kept going. And you thought Ryan would just, what? Be cool with that. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice tightening. Okay, he said, nodding slowly. Then explain to me how it was. She hesitated, just for a second. I thought it would be fine, she said finally. We're all adults. We can have friends. Daniel blinked again, then let out a short breath through his nose. Right, he said. Sure. Adults can have friends. Her mother shifted slightly, her expression thoughtful but still gentle. Jannet, she said. Did you think about how Ryan might feel about it? I told him, Jannet said quickly. I didn't hide anything. That's not the same thing, her father said quietly. The words settled heavily in the room. Jannet frowned, her mind pushing back automatically. I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't flirting or… That's not the point, Daniel said. She turned to him, irritation flaring. Then what is the point? He stared at her for a second, then shook his head slowly. Wow, he muttered. Okay. What? He looked at her directly now. You invited a man on a date, he said, his voice steady. While you were on a date with your boyfriend. The words landed cleanly. Too cleanly. For a moment, everything else fell away. Jannet blinked. I didn't, she started, but the sentence didn't finish, because suddenly, she heard it. Not how she had framed it. Not how she had justified it, but how it actually sounded. The silence that followed was different now, thicker, heavier. Her stomach dropped. Oh, she said quietly, and just like that, the certainty she had been holding on to cracked. She tried again, but there was nothing to defend anymore. The logic she had relied on all week dissolved under the weight of something painfully obvious. Her cheeks flushed, heat rising up her neck as realization set in fully. Oh my God, she whispered. Daniel didn't say anything this time. Her mother reached across the table, her hand resting gently over Janet's. It's okay to make mistakes, she said softly. I didn't even see it, Jannet said, her voice barely audible. I really didn't see it. That happens, her father said, though his tone carried less softness than her mother's. He pushed himself up from his chair suddenly, the movement abrupt enough to draw everyone's attention. Where are you going? Her mother asked, startled. He grabbed his keys from the counter without hesitation. I'm going to the Humane Society, he said. Jannet blinked at him, still reeling. What? He glanced back over his shoulder. I'm adopting a cat, he said matter-of-factly. The room went quiet for a second. A cat? Her mother repeated. Yes, he said. Because at this rate, it doesn't look like I'm ever getting a grandchild. Dad, Jannet said, somewhere between mortified and incredulous. I'll be back later, he added, heading toward the door. The door closed behind him, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Daniel rubbed his face, shaking his head. That escalated quickly. Jannet dropped her head into her hands. I cannot believe I did that, she muttered. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. What matters is that you understand it now. I thought, Jannet started then stopped. I thought I was just being friendly. I thought it was harmless. And maybe to you it was, her mother said. But relationships aren't just about what we intend. They're about how our actions affect the other person. Jannet exhaled slowly, the weight of that settling in. She sat there for a long moment, replaying everything now with a different lens. The texts, the lunches, the invitation, Ryan's silence. His expression when Sam showed up. The way he'd said okay. The way he'd walked away. I need to talk to him, she said finally. Her voice was steadier now, but quieter, stripped of the confidence it had started the day with. Her mother nodded. Then you should. Jannet sat back in her chair, staring at the table as the reality of it all settled fully into place. Two things became painfully clear to her at once. She was very good at convincing herself she was right, and she was smart enough to know when she wasn't. Somewhere between those two truths, she had crossed a line she hadn't even seen. And now she had to figure out if she could fix something she hadn't realized she was breaking. Chapter 6, Owning the Truth. Her father returned 2 hours later with a cat. Jannet was sitting on the couch when the front door opened, her thoughts looping in quiet circles she could no longer justify out of. She looked up automatically as he stepped inside, carrying a small cardboard carrier with air holes punched neatly along the sides. "You're serious," she said faintly. "I'm always serious," he replied, setting the carrier down with the same matter-of-fact energy he brought to everything else in his life. From across the room, Daniel leaned forward, grinning. "No way, you actually did it." "I said I would," their father said, crouching down to unlatch the small metal door. Their mother sighed softly, though there was a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You're unbelievable." Jannet moved closer despite herself, curiosity overriding the lingering heaviness in her chest. The door clicked open, and after a moment, a small gray and white cat stepped out cautiously, blinking at the unfamiliar space. "She's tiny," Jannet said. "Not for long," her father replied. "She'll grow." Daniel crouched beside the cat, holding out a hand. "What's her name?" "Fred," their father said without hesitation. Jannet blinked again. "Fred. Short for Frederica." Daniel snorted. "Of course it is." The cat glanced around with mild suspicion before taking a few tentative steps onto the living room floor. She paused near Janet's foot, looking up at her as if waiting for approval. Jannet let out a breath that felt unexpectedly lighter, the absurdity of the situation cutting gently through everything else. "Hi, Fred," she said quietly. The cat blinked at her, unimpressed. For a few minutes, the room shifted. Laughter, small comments, Daniel attempting to win the cat over and failing spectacularly. It was normal in a way that felt grounding. But beneath it all, the weight of the day hadn't disappeared. It just waited. Eventually, the noise settled, and Jannet found herself back at the kitchen table, her phone resting in front of her, silent but heavy with possibility. "You're going to call him," Daniel said, pulling out a chair across from her. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "When?" She looked at the phone. "Soon." "Nervous?" he asked, not teasing this time. She exhaled slowly. "Not nervous. Just aware." "Of what?" "That I don't get to decide how this ends," she said. Daniel nodded once, as if that answer satisfied something. "That's new for you," he added. She gave him a tired look. "I'm not that bad." "You're not bad," he said. "You just like being right." "I wasn't trying to be right," she muttered. "Maybe not," he said. "But you were definitely trying to be not wrong." That landed. Jannet leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment before closing her eyes briefly. "I need to do this properly," she said. "Not rush it. Not talk my way around it." "Yeah," Daniel said. "Probably a good idea." She picked up her phone, turning it over in her hand. There were no new messages. Ryan hadn't reached out. That, more than anything, made the situation feel real. He wasn't reacting. He was deciding. The thought settled heavily, but it didn't scare her the way it might have earlier. It cleared something instead, stripped away the instinct to defend, to explain prematurely. She needed to be honest. Not strategically honest. Actually honest. Her thumb hovered over his name, then pressed. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Each second stretched slightly, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of it in a way she couldn't ignore now. On the 4th ring, it clicked. "Hey!" His voice was calm. Too calm. "Hey!" she said quietly. There was a pause, not awkward but measured. "How are you?" she asked. Another pause. "I've been better," he said. She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Okay," she said softly. "That's fair." Silence again. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm not calling to argue," she began, "or to explain it in a way that makes me sound better." Ryan didn't interrupt. "I understand what I did," she continued. "I didn't at the time, but I do now." There was a shift at the other end of the line. Slight, but present. "Okay," he said. She swallowed. "I invited another man to spend time with us on what was supposed to be our date," she said. "And I didn't think about how that would make you feel. I thought it was harmless because I knew what I meant by it. But that doesn't matter." Her voice didn't waver, but it softened. "I was wrong." The words sat between them, uncomplicated. "True." Ryan exhaled slowly. She could hear it through the line. "I appreciate you saying that," he said. She let out a small breath of her own, but didn't rush forward. "I'm not going to justify it," she added, "because there isn't a version of that where it's okay. Not really. I crossed a line, even if I didn't realize I was doing it at the time." Another pause. Longer this time. "I didn't want to make a scene," Ryan said finally. "At the festival." "I know. I didn't want to argue in front of him," he continued. "Or compete for your attention." The word compete landed heavily. "I wasn't competing," she said quickly, then stopped herself. "That wasn't the point." "I see why it felt that way," she corrected quietly. Ryan didn't respond immediately. "I'm not going to chase attention in my own relationship," he said after a moment. "It should be given, freely." Her chest tightened. "I agree," she said. "And it didn't feel like that yesterday. I understand that now." Another stretch of silence. Not empty. Processing. I don't know yet if it was just a lapse in judgment, he said. Or something bigger. Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone. That's fair, she said. You don't have to decide right now. I know. I just needed you to hear it from me, she added. Without excuses. Ryan's voice softened slightly when he spoke again. I hear you. That wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't rejection either. It was space. I'm not mad, he said after a moment. I'm just disappointed. The word hit harder than anger would have. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know. Silence again. Different this time. Less tense, but still unresolved. I'm going to take some time, Ryan said finally, to think. Okay. I'll call you, he added. Okay, she repeated. There was one more pause between them, something unspoken lingering just beneath the surface. Good night, Jannet, he said. Good night, Ryan. The call ended. She sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in her hand, the absence of his voice settling in slowly. It wasn't over, but it wasn't fixed either. It was in between. From the living room, she could hear Daniel laughing softly at something as the cat darted away from him again. Come on, Fred. Give me something, he called. Jannet let out a quiet breath, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite everything. Then she set her phone down. For the first time all day, she wasn't trying to shape the outcome. She wasn't rehearsing arguments or searching for ways to be understood. She had said what needed to be said, truthfully. And now she had to wait. Chapter 7, The Waiting Space. The silence that followed was not empty. It had texture. Jannet noticed it first on Monday morning, sitting at her desk with her coffee cooling just slightly faster than usual because she wasn't drinking it. The office looked the same, routine humming quietly in the background, coworkers settling into their tasks, but something inside her had shifted enough that the familiar felt less fixed. Waiting did that. Her phone sat beside her keyboard, screen dark. She hadn't reached out to Ryan again. She had said what she needed to say, and pressing further would turn honesty into pressure. That line, at least she understood now. Still, the absence of a message from him occupied more space than she wanted to admit. Morning, Melissa said, passing by. Morning. Jannet turned back to her screen, willing herself into focus. Work had always been something she could control, structured, predictable. Today, it took more effort than usual to stay there. Her phone buzzed. Her hand moved instinctively toward it before she caught herself, pausing just long enough to register the reflex. Then she picked it up. It wasn't Ryan. It was Sam. Sam, hey, I've been meaning to check in. You okay? She stared at the message for a moment, her thumb hovering above the screen. It wasn't an unreasonable question. It wasn't intrusive. But now it carried weight it hadn't before. She turned the phone face down without replying. That too was new. Across the room, Sam moved near the conference area, speaking with someone else. Janet's eyes landed there briefly before she pulled them back to her screen. There had never been anything explicit. That was still true. No lines openly crossed, no intentions stated outright. But something had existed in the space between what was said and what wasn't, and she had allowed it to grow. At noon, she stayed at her desk. Sam passed by a few minutes later, slowing slightly. Hey, he said. She looked up, offering a small, polite smile. Hey, you disappeared Friday, he said. Everything all right? She held his gaze for a second, then nodded. I needed some time, she said, to think about things. Something flickered in his expression. Not confusion, not surprise, but recognition. About what happened? He asked. Yes. A brief pause settled between them. I didn't mean to make anything complicated, he said. I know, she replied, and she did. That was the difficult part. He hadn't pushed, hadn't crossed an obvious line, hadn't done anything that would make him the problem, which meant it had been her responsibility. I should have handled things differently, she continued, her tone calm but firm. I blurred some boundaries that shouldn't have been blurred. Sam nodded slowly. Because of Ryan, he said. Yes. Another pause. He shifted his weight slightly, looking down for a moment before meeting her eyes again. I like talking to you, he said. You know that, right? It wasn't a question meant to pressure her. It was simpler than that, honest, direct. I do, she said. And I wasn't trying to interfere. I know. They stood there for a second, the conversation balancing carefully between what was said and what remained implicit. I should probably take a step back, he said finally. The words came with a quiet acceptance. Jannet felt something in her chest ease. Not relief exactly, but alignment. I think that's a good idea, she said gently. He gave a small nod, something like closure settling into his expression. All right, he said. I'll see you around. Yeah, she said. See you around. He moved on without another word, the exchange ending cleanly, without drama. Jannet sat there for a moment after he walked away, her hands resting lightly on her desk. There wasn't regret in what she had said, just clarity. For the rest of the afternoon, she worked steadily, each task grounding her a little more. The noise in her mind quieted. Not completely, but enough to think without circling the same thoughts over and over. This was what it meant to change something, she realized. Not dramatic declarations, not immediate resolutions, just small, consistent choices. That evening, she stopped by her parents' house again. Fred greeted her at the door, or rather, stared at her from a safe distance as if assessing her intentions. "She's warming up to me," Daniel said from the couch. "She's tolerating you," Jannet corrected. "It's progress." Their father glanced over from his chair. "She has standards." "Clearly," Jannet said, kneeling slightly to let the cat sniff her hand. Fred allowed it for a moment before walking away with quiet independence. "Still judging me?" Jannet muttered. "Good," her father replied. "Someone should." She smiled faintly at that, standing again. "How are you feeling?" her mother asked gently. Jannet considered the question. "Better," she said. "Not good, but better. That makes sense. I talked to Ryan," she added. All three of them looked at her. "And?" Daniel prompted. "He's taking time," she said. "To think." Her father nodded once. "That's reasonable." "It is." "And you?" her mother asked. Jannet exhaled slowly. "I'm not rushing him," she said. "I'm not trying to convince him of anything. I just—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I just want to be someone who doesn't put him in that position again." The room was quiet for a second. "That's the right goal," her mother said. Her father glanced up. "Change is not what you say. It's what you do next." Jannet nodded. "I know." And she did. Later that night, back in her apartment, the quiet felt different than it had a few days ago. Not empty. Intentional. She set her phone on the nightstand, resisting the instinct to check it one more time before bed. If Ryan needed time, then she would give it to him. Fully. She lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling for a moment before closing her eyes. For the first time in days, her thoughts didn't immediately rush to defend or justify. They simply settled. Whatever came next, she would meet it honestly. And for once, that felt like enough. Chapter 8, What Comes Next? Ryan called on Thursday evening. Jannet was sitting at her small kitchen table, a half-finished dinner in front of her, and a book she hadn't really been reading resting open beside her plate. The call startled her. Not because she hadn't been expecting it, but because expectation had slowly turned into something quieter over the past few days. Acceptance, maybe. Her phone lit up, his name steady on the screen. She didn't rush to answer this time. She took a breath first. Not to prepare a response, not to structure anything, just to settle herself into the moment as it was. Then she picked up. "Hey," she said. "Hey," Ryan replied. His voice sounded the same. It always did. "How are you?" he asked. She considered it honestly. "I'm okay." "That's good." A small silence followed, not strained, but careful. "Do you want to meet?" he asked. Her grip on the phone tightened slightly. "Yes. Tonight." "Yes." There was no hesitation in that answer. They chose a place they'd been to before, a quiet cafe halfway between their apartments. Neutral ground, but familiar enough to soften the edges. Jannet arrived first. She chose a table near the window, her hands folded lightly in front of her as she watched the street outside. People moved with unhurried purpose, small groups talking, someone laughing too loudly at something she couldn't hear. Life continuing. When Ryan walked in, she recognized him instantly, not just in appearance, but in presence. There was something steady about him, something that didn't shift easily. It was part of why she had loved him so easily, still did. "Hey," he said as he approached. "Hey." They didn't hug. Not immediately. He sat across from her, placing his hands on the table, mirroring her posture in a way that felt almost deliberate. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan exhaled softly. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "I figured," she replied. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You're not wrong." She waited. That was new, too. "I went over everything in my head," he continued. "What happened, what led up to it, how it felt." Jannet nodded slightly. "Okay. And I kept coming back to the same thing," he said. His gaze held hers now, steady and searching. "It wasn't just Saturday." Her chest tightened, but she didn't interrupt. "I could feel things shifting before that," he went on. "The texting, the way your attention wasn't fully here. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to overreact. I told myself it was nothing." Jannet swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "I didn't notice it," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "That was the hardest part." "I believe you didn't mean it," he said. "But that doesn't change the fact that I felt it." She nodded. "I understand." He studied her for a second, as if weighing the sincerity of that response. "And when he showed up," Ryan continued, his voice tightening just slightly. "That was the moment it all became real. Not just in my head." Jannet looked down briefly, then back up. "I see that now," she said. "I really do." Another pause. "I've had a few days to think about what I want," Ryan said. Her pulse picked up, but she didn't speak. "I don't want a relationship where I have to question my place in it," he said. "You shouldn't," she replied immediately. "No," he agreed. "I shouldn't." Silence settled again, heavier this time. But, he added after a moment, I don't want to walk away from something important because of one mistake, if it really is just that. Her breath caught slightly. Okay, she said. I needed to know if you actually understood it, he continued. Not just what happened, but why it mattered. I do, she said. I didn't at the time, but I do now. He held her gaze. Tell me, he said. The words weren't a challenge. They were a request. Jannet took a slow breath. I let someone take up space that should have been yours, she said. Not intentionally, but consistently. I convinced myself it was harmless because I knew I wasn't doing anything romantic. But I didn't think about the effect of it. Her voice steadied as she continued. I didn't notice how often I was reaching for my phone, or how much attention I was giving away in pieces. And then I turned something that was supposed to be ours into something shared without asking if that was okay. Ryan watched her quietly. It wasn't about Sam, she added. Not really. It was about me not recognizing a boundary before I crossed it. That landed. He leaned back slightly, processing. And now? He asked. Now I pay attention, she said. Not just to what I mean, but to what I do. Those aren't the same thing, and I understand that now. Another pause. Longer. Ryan exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. That's what I needed to hear, he said. Relief didn't rush in, just a quiet shift in the air between them. I'm not going to pretend it didn't affect things, he added. It did. I know. And it's going to take time to feel steady again. I know. He studied her again, something softer in his expression now. But I don't think we're broken, he said. Her breath left her in a slow exhale she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, he echoed. For the first time since he'd sat down, he reached across the table. Not all the way, not fully closing the distance, but enough that his hand rested within reach. She looked at it for a second, then placed her hand over his. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a resolution. But it was something. A beginning again, not from scratch, but from a place that knew where the cracks had been. Ryan's thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles, absent-minded but grounding. They sat like that for a moment, the noise of the cafe filling the spaces they didn't need to rush to fill. That cat your dad adopted, he said suddenly. Does it have a normal name? Jannet blinked, caught off guard. No, she said, a small laugh escaping. Her name is Fred. Ryan smiled, actually smiled. Fred. Short for Frederica, she added. Of course it is. She shook her head, the tension easing slightly from her shoulders. They'll probably send you pictures, she said. I look forward to that. Another pause, but this one felt different. Lighter. Saturday, he said after a moment. We could try again. Try what? She asked, though she knew. The festival, he said. There's still time. Her lips curved into a small, tentative smile. Without extra invitations, he added. Without extra invitations, she agreed. This time, when they stood to leave, the movement felt natural. And when he pulled her into a brief, quiet hug outside the cafe, it didn't feel like something fragile. It felt like something that had been tested. And chosen. Again.